We live in the age of foam, where whatever floats holds value. Depth sinks, and to sink today is to disappear. The logic of modern society is simple. Don't think, perform. Don't go deep, consume. Don't question, participate. Instead of being, appear. Instead of understanding, repeat. Superficiality is no longer a flaw. It has become a virtue. In an age where image is more powerful than thought, those who dedicate themselves to thinking become disposable. The world has no patience for listening, only for reacting. The culture of appearances demands fast answers, ready smiles, fragile but well-packaged certainties. Truth has become negotiable, adaptable to social context. What matters isn't who you are, but how you appear on the timeline. Schopenhauer saw this distortion coming long before the internet ever existed. He said, "The less a man has in himself, the more he seeks outside himself." Modern society is full of empty people looking for validation in applause. And the shallower the content, the greater its chance of acceptance. Because the shallow does not confront. It doesn't demand. It doesn't disturb. It merely confirms what everyone already believes. And that is its power. Superficiality also protects. It's a shield against the discomfort of doubt, the weight of awareness, the demands of ethics. In a world where thinking has become a nearly hostile act, superficiality is welcomed. It maintains the flow of normality, reinforces the consensus, prevents disruption, and society rewards it with likes, followers, acceptance. In this scenario, intelligence ceases to be a social asset. It becomes an inconvenience. Thinking too much is seen as overcomplicating. Digging too deep is seen as elitism. Those who question are annoying. Those who stay quiet fit in. The result? Brilliant minds adapting, disguising themselves, pretending not to see in order to not be seen as threats. Superficiality is not neutral. It is a system, a method of emotional, aesthetic, and moral control. The less people think, the more easily they consume, vote, follow, obey. Alienation is no accident. It's a strategy. And in this game, intelligence is a system error. So it gets neutralized subtly, through laughter, through disregard, through silence. The thinker doesn't need to be destroyed, just ignored. And the cruelest part, many intelligent people accept the game. They trade depth for approval. They sell their lucidity for belonging. They become domesticated versions of themselves. They become what they despise, just to avoid being despised. That is the triumph of superficiality, making even the lucid doubt their own vision. Schopenhauer warned, popular culture will always aim to level things downward, because what is elevated requires effort, and effort scares people. He believed great minds are destined for solitude, not out of arrogance, but misalignment. Those who seek meaning find silence. Those who seek popularity find echo. In the end, superficiality became the new ideal. Lightness became escape. Optimism became denial. Intelligence became a nuisance that must be tamed. And those who reject this logic, they are the exiles, the misfits, the disturbers. But they are also, paradoxically, the last guardians of human depth. Thinking too much isn't just socially inconvenient. It's a transgression. In a world built on shallow consensus and emotional performance, deep thinking becomes a silent threat, not because the thinker shouts, but because they see, and those who see, truly see, make others uncomfortable. Because lucidity, at its core, is an act of disobedience. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long ago. For him, elevated intellect doesn't seek crowds, it seeks coherence, and for that reason, it is inevitably solitary. True intelligence is not designed to please. It is designed to question, and questioning breaks illusions. In this world, intelligence isn't just unwanted, It's dangerous because it threatens the comfortable order of collective ignorance. Modern society fears doubt. It prefers the safety of fragile, recycled beliefs. It prefers simplified opinions, delivered in 15-second videos and truths curated by algorithms. Anyone who dares to think outside that script is seen as arrogant, negative, or problematic. The content of the thought doesn't matter, only the discomfort it creates. The more intelligent a man is, the more unsociable he becomes, wrote Schopenhauer. Not out of disdain, but out of saturation. Daily life demands a kind of performance, pretending everything makes sense, laughing at the right jokes, agreeing with the expected opinions. But the thinker can't maintain that charade for long. They see the backstage, and that inevitably distances them, not by choice, but by consequence. Thinking too much is dangerous because it unmasks, and society thrives on masks. The mask of success, of happiness, of normality. The thinker breaks the spell. They begin to see that behind the "be yourself" mantra, there's a behavioral code. That behind freedom of expression, there's a moral tribunal. That behind "live in the moment," there's a deep denial of existential emptiness. True intelligence doesn't conform, it disturbs. And the world doesn't like being disturbed. So it tries to silence the thinker, with irony, with dismissal, with disregard. Mass culture doesn't need to destroy the thinker. It just needs to exhaust them, to make them irrelevant. Or worse, to seduce them into adapting, to make their intelligence palatable, superficial, marketable, as if lucidity could be domesticated. And many fall into that trap. They sell their thoughts as content, edit their ideas to fit the feed, transform reflection into entertainment. And yes, they survive. But they lose something fundamental, the power of their clarity. They become shadows of what they could be, forever torn between what they show and what they truly know. Schopenhauer knew, to think is to bleed in silence. It is to stare directly at the absurd and not look away. It is to refuse the collective anesthesia. That's why the true thinker never feels entirely at home in the world, nor should they, because the world, as it stands, was designed for those who do not think. Thinking too much is dangerous, yes, but not for the thinker, for the system. And that's why thinkers will always be seen as strange, as too much, as a problem. But perhaps, in the end, being a problem is the only proof left that you are still alive, and still thinking. The loneliness of the intelligent is not an accident, it's a sentence, not handed down through hatred or direct rejection, but through a deep and irreversible incompatibility with the rhythms of the herd. The lucid one, by seeing too much, feels too much. And in feeling too much, they can no longer exist lightly within the social theater, where most people act naturally. They don't isolate themselves. They are expelled by moral gravity. Arthur Schopenhauer was one of the first to recognize this condition not as a flaw, but as a destiny. He wrote that the more intelligent a man is, the more he tends toward solitude. Not from misanthropy, but for existential hygiene. The thinker, upon sensing the emptiness of conversations, the repetition of behaviors, the predictability of desires, naturally withdraws. Not out of pride, but exhaustion. Living among the unthinking is like screaming into a well. You receive automated answers to questions no one ever asked. You try to share silence with those terrified of the sound of their own minds. And the deeper the vision, the more barren the coexistence becomes. Because the lucid can't just let it go. They feel the weight of things. They see the abyss behind the rehearsed smiles. They perceive the dissonance between what's said and what's lived. Over time, an invisible wall grows between them and the rest. But the lucid's loneliness carries a cruel paradox. They are not hermits by nature. The thinker longs for connection, but real connection, not social conventions. They yearn for depth, not crowd, and it is this very search that isolates them. Because the more they seek meaning, the more they encounter emptiness. The more they open up, the more they realize how few are willing to truly listen. The loneliness of the lucid is not just the absence of company, it's the excess of consciousness. Here lies the most uncomfortable truth. Most people fear the lucid, not out of malice, but instinct. Being near someone who truly sees is to be reminded of everything you're avoiding. The thinker carries mirrors, and mirrors are dangerous for those hiding behind masks. Their presence, even in silence, is threatening. They destabilize without trying, awaken without preaching, and those who do not want to awaken, withdraw. Schopenhauer insisted, the wise should not lament this solitude. They should cultivate it, because it is in solitude that one becomes whole. In it, thought matures. The isolation becomes a fertile space of creation, not a prison. But this requires strength, because the world does not merely isolate the lucid. It tempts them to return, to fit in, to soften. And resisting this is a daily act of courage. The loneliness of the lucid is a borderland, a place where the cost of not being blind is paid, where one lives without echo, but with truth. And this is a higher form of existence, even if harder. The thinker who accepts their solitude does not become cold. They become whole. They withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of integrity. They understand that thinking is a path that often doesn't allow for company, but that, because of this, reveals what only silence can teach. To be alone is not failure. It is the inevitable side effect of seeing what others pretend not to see. And that kind of solitude, rather than shrinking you, expands you. It doesn't distance you from the world. It frees you from it. Authenticity is praised in speech, but punished in practice. Society applauds the idea of being yourself, as long as that self doesn't confront, disturb, or step out of line. In truth, the modern world doesn't want authenticity. It wants edited versions of the self. It wants originality only to the extent that it remains marketable, agreeable, controllable. To be authentic in a world that demands conformity is an act of resistance. And those who dare to remain loyal to their own lucidity, to their own vision, to their inconvenient questions, pay a price. A high price. Not in money, but in isolation, in misunderstanding, in subtle rejection. Intellectual and moral authenticity is a stone in the shoe of the social machine. Small, but unbearable. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "To be truthful in a world of disguises is a burden." And he was right. The authentic person doesn't have the luxury of naivety. They see too much, feel too much, perceive too much. And by refusing to play the game of superficiality, they become a walking discomfort. People often can't explain why they feel uneasy around someone who is deeply genuine. But they do. Because the authentic person, without attacking anyone, reveals the performance of everyone else. But society isn't the only one that punishes. The authentic person's own life becomes heavier. Because they can't seek refuge in illusions. They can't pretend not to know. And knowing, often, means carrying a weight others don't even imagine. The lucid live in constant tension between coherence and social survival. And staying true to yourself in a world that demands masks is a daily battle. To be authentic is to choose friction over easy acceptance. It is to prefer the discomfort of truth over the comfort of a lie. It is to walk without applause, without guaranteed belonging, without constant validation. It often means being called too intense, too much, too complicated. But the alternative, to surrender, to stay silent, to mold yourself, costs something even greater: integrity. Schopenhauer didn't believe in the reconciliation between elevated thought and the crowd. For him, the price of authenticity is exclusion, and that exclusion shouldn't be seen as punishment, but as proof of sanity. Because staying true to your own vision in a world hostile to truth is not weakness, it's strength. Society claims to want you to be authentic, as long as that authenticity doesn't challenge the dominant myths. The cult of superficial happiness, hollow optimism, conformity disguised as inner peace. But real authenticity confronts those myths. It reveals the artificial, the fabricated, the inconsistent, and that makes it costly. Here lies the trap. Many intelligent people eventually choose to adapt, to dilute themselves, to become palatable. They soften their words, trim their thoughts, water down their depth. And yes, they gain acceptance, but they lose something essential: the force of their clarity. They become tame versions of themselves, and they live forever divided between what they show and what they know. Authenticity, then, is a difficult choice. It is neither heroic nor glamorous, but it is the only way to remain whole in a world that fragments. The price is high, but the alternative, to live as a character of yourself, is unbearable for anyone who has ever tasted truth. In the end, it's not about ego. It's about the survival of consciousness. And those who dare to be authentic, even when it hurts, may be the only ones who haven't lost themselves. We've reached a point where lucidity is no longer a virtue. It's a threat. In a world built for mental and emotional comfort, thinking is an act of provocation. Seeing clearly has become a kind of crime. To feel too much, perceive too much, question too much, all of this marks you as an outsider, a body off script, a name left off the list. True intelligence is not a reward. It's a sentence. Not because the world is evil, but because most people don't want to wake up. They don't want complexity. They want simplicity. They don't want lucidity. They want comfort. And so, those Schopenhauer saw this with brutal clarity. He knew that the thinker is always at war. But it's a silent, internal, endless war. A war against noise, against diluted consciousness, against the temptation to conform. And this is where the responsibility of those who see begins. Being lucid today is not just a state of mind. It's a mission. Because once you've seen, you can't unsee. Once you understand, you can't pretend not to. There is an ethical responsibility that comes with intelligence. To resist, to stay whole in a world that thrives on fragmentation, to remain free in a system designed to domesticate you. This is not a romantic call to isolation, nor a heroic glorification of intellectual exile. It is a plea for critical consciousness, a warning that the world desperately needs people who do not sell out, who do not deceive themselves, who do not bow. Because without them, everything collapses. Everything becomes a show. Everything becomes algorithm. The age of noise needs thinkers who choose silence. The age of performance needs human beings willing to be real, even when no one's watching. The age of superficiality needs, urgently, depth, density, coherence. And that depth won't come from the majority. It will come from the few who refuse. If you feel out of place, strange, misunderstood, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe the real mistake is remaining sane in a normalized madness, refusing to adapt to a reality built to keep you numb. But here comes the hardest part, the confrontation. Awareness is not enough. Action is required. Steadiness is required. You must not only see the herd, you must refuse to follow it, and more than that, you must have the courage to walk your own path, even when everyone else says you're lost. Because the real confrontation doesn't happen in debates or online battles. It happens in daily choices, in standing firm under pressure, in remaining silent in the face of lies, in preserving your integrity when everything around you invites dissimulation. Lucidity has a cost. But blindness has a much higher price: the loss of yourself, the slow death of your voice, living a life that isn't yours, repeating ideas you don't believe, obeying rules you never chose, dying before ever truly living. So if you still think, feel, question, resist, don't step back. Don't adapt. Don't sell yourself. The world may never fully understand you, but it needs you.